Welcome back to the Mayhem Performance Coaching Podcast. Today we got Mike McElroy with us, and we're just going to go over off-season training, kind of dive into some specifics on that. And we're actually going to really talk about like 3 mistakes most people make in their off-season when they get into off-season training. So many of us now moving into off-season after quarterfinals just kind of feel fired up about our seasons and excited to get in the swing of it. And all of a sudden we're just like back to training for quarterfinals. And that is definitely not what we should be doing. So we brought in our specialist here. According to Jake Nomchev, he's been CrossFitting for 72 years. Competed against Rich a while back. I'm going to let him introduce himself since I've only been in the CrossFit space for about 12. So
no sponsorships.
Yeah. Oh, sponsors today are Buffalo Brew, Froning Fitness. I just like to look around in here. I can't say Rogue, but that would be cool. Mayhem Performance Camp, which is coming up in June. Yeah. Plug. We'll talk more about
June
that.
June 29th
soon.
and 30th. Yeah.
So,
Mike, who are you?
Yes.
Thanks for first off for saying my name right. I think you're the first one in the Mayhem industry that said it right.
A lot of people say McElroy. Like, that's definitely not what it says on the paper.
So I've been in the CrossFit space since about 2005. Unlike Jake Nomchev said, I was not 50 when I was competing in my first competition, but I did compete with him and Rich in that first competition. It's sanctionals back then in Huntsville. Had a CrossFit gym started in 2009, started doing individual coaching probably 2012, 13, and I've been going more and more towards that over the years. Went full-time individual coaching and sold the CrossFit gym in 2019, and I've been here with Mayhem for a little over a year now. So
tell us how you got to Mayhem.
Worked with Jake for a while, mentoring him on just coaching and program design, and when he started here, we were still doing that, and so he brought me on, and it fits. It's been a blessing. It fits my ideology from a coaching perspective as far as the faith, and being a part of a company that backs that has been a huge blessing. So
I'll provide a little more background to how we got Mike here at Mayhem. I tell everybody this, that I paid Mike to mentor me as a coach. I paid Mike to coach me and then mentor me. Efficiency was
about the coaching part.
He coached me for a little bit. Got my Achilles back to a good place. Got me running again, which was awesome. And Mike mentored me for a bit. So when I came on board at Mayhem and we knew we were going to start building out a team or a staff, when Jake Lockhart and I sat down, we're like, okay, who do we got? Like, who are we going to hire? I was like, we have to go get Mike McElroy. So I was like, that was number one on the list. So got Mike, and dude, been pumped to have you. Yeah. I think the secret is just hire your mentors. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Basically what's been happening. We'll get Sean on here eventually, but basically everybody who's poured into me, we're just hiring them to work for Mayhem.
So application efficiency, things like that is what we talked about. We've kind of joked that Sean, who hadn't been on yet, but he's gets more in the weeds. So he would talk to Jake and explain things, and then Jake would come to me and be like, all right, what does that even mean?
How do I practically apply?
Practically apply all of this. So,
Well, I mean, what you said, you started CrossFit in 2005?
Yeah. So
how do you even hear about CrossFit in 2005?
Yeah, so I was actually working out at a gym at a golf course because I was a golfer, and I was going to a summer camp that had I knew I was only going to have access to a barbell and some plates, and so there was a guy there that had seen the website, and he was like, check this website out, and so I started doing .com. And really pretty quickly, I didn't do .com very long. I never liked the just completely random, not random, but varied, as I would say. And so I got on to a couple different programs throughout that and did some of Greg Everett's Catalyst Athletic stuff. And and then I got on to Big Dogs with OPEX or OPT at the time and things like that. And so I've always kind of followed a more structured program than just varied CrossFit. And so that's always, I've always gravitated towards that. And so that's where the individual coaching came in, is just doing some kind of an actual training program, especially if you're trying to compete in the sport and make it, your profession, or make it what you're doing, and trying to take it more serious than just get in it for health and fitness. Because at the time, even even then at the time there was no competition. It was just doing it for fitness, which is an interesting concept now to think about because of how competitive I am. It's just like there was a leaderboard on CrossFit.com, but that was it. So yeah, there's a lot of stories that have happened in the years that I've been involved in CrossFit.
To learn a little bit more about you as a coach, obviously you enjoy working with performance athletes,
Mm-hmm.
of course. Who are the people within that broad population, people who want to get better at the sport, that you're either the most passionate about helping, or you feel like you have the biggest, or you're the best at helping, either or, passionate or best at helping?
Yeah,
both.
I think maybe not passionate about is may or may not be the right way to look at it. I mean, I am, but the people I've gravitated towards, or maybe the people that have gravitated towards me, is there's a lot of mindset stuff that goes into the sport, and that goes with any athletes, right? You start to get wrapped up in the identity, and you start to either lose confidence or just not gaining the confidence you should, or you're not performing like you should on game day, or letting it affect your outside life more than you have. So I've always been big on building the relationship and affecting more than just their work in the gym, and more than just their work on the leaderboard. And so that's why this fits so well, being here, because that's kind of something that unites all of us, that we know that there's more to it than just being an athlete and just the leaderboard. And like when I went home from last camp, where we had the elite camp before that, I was just telling my wife how cool it was that, like, at the end, and these are the best of the best in the sport. These are games athletes that we're talking to and running through this camp. And you went through that spill of, like, at the end of the day, yes, we want to win, but we know that that's not our ultimate value. Sure. That's not where we sit. And so, it's people that I guess maybe need somebody to speak into them, to help with confidence and help with understanding their value and understanding purpose and understanding what they're even doing in the sport. And sometimes that leads to people quitting the sport, and that's okay, and that's part of the coaching. And sometimes it takes people to a different level in their sport. So,
cool. How long have you been doing, like, remote individual coaching?
Yeah, so remote, I probably started my first individual athlete was probably 2012. And then probably in a remote setting shortly after that, probably a year or two after that.
Cool. How many people do you think you've coached up to this point? Like, if you had to guess a number.
How many years is that? 10, 12, 500?
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I may be completely off on that.
Yeah.
Maybe 100, maybe 1,000.
The lower number sounds better, right? Like his retention's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's like 3,000. Yeah.
Over the course of that much time.
Yeah.
That is impressive.
Yeah. I mean,
you can see why I paid for Mike to mentor me, where a lot of it too is history in the sport. Like, you've been there since day one.
Yeah.
And then I think too, what Mike helped me a lot with was teaching me. I mean, it's just every coach has different methods and applications of doing things, but I think one big thing, like when you come from more of like like science background in the sport, like having Sean mentor me for a long time, and going through OPEX and getting your CCP, like you start getting your head in the weeds a little bit. Like, I think Mike helped pull me out of that and be like, dude, play. Like, we got to play the game. The sport is varied. Like, and not overthinking everything that I was doing. Like, that I could still follow principles, but within those principles have more, I don't know a better word than play, like with application of those principles.
Yeah, and that's just time, and that's where mentors can help, because otherwise it's just time of getting through it. And because I think we all probably have gone through that, and I for sure have. And I know that's one of the things we talked about early on in our mentoring is going through that phase where, and leading into off-season stuff, like I used to pull people out even more than I do now, like completely pull people out, because you learn the principles of not doing concurrent training and splitting things up, and separating out and working on things specifically. But at the end of the day, you're still doing CrossFit. You still got to do CrossFit, and there's a mental thing that goes along with that. Like, I mean, Rich is a great example. Like, if you pulled him out completely, like, it wouldn't work at all, just because he loves CrossFit and he wants to be doing CrossFit all the time. So there's that component. But then there's also things we'll talk about more specifically of, like, physiological reasons you need to pull those things out and give yourself a break and give your body a break. So there's different reasons, but you have to, depending on the person, you have to keep people in the sport more or less, depending on them and how they enjoy that kind of stuff as well.
Sure. I think too, even in CrossFit as a sport in general, we're still figuring out how things work
100%.
because it is still new. And sometimes there's like things we're looking at what we understand from other strength and conditioning in other sports. And we're like, wait a second, that isn't even working in our sport.
Yep.
And that's like a basic principle in some sense. So
Yeah.
I think what's really cool with like even having you on here, just on staff, is just us learning from experience. Because if there's anything I've learned in this sport, it's like our expertise only goes as far as the boundaries of our experience.
Yep.
And the more experience you have just like testing random stuff in the CrossFit space, the better you get at programming,
Yep.
the better you get at coaching in this, both emotionally, relationally, and specifically like in developing an athlete, is the more experience you have as a coach failing and writing the wrong programs, the better coach you become. And there's a million things I can think of that I learned in like my exercise science degree and all the time I spent in there, even in like the internships that I did in strength and conditioning at FGCU and stuff, where I learned so many principles for so many different sports, and it worked across every single one. That I became a CrossFit coach and I was like,
Doesn't work.
that doesn't even work. Like, how am I going to figure this out for blending gymnastics with just a million different energy systems? And it is just crazy. And I think,
and the only way to figure it out, like you said, is just doing it. And both, and I've learned a lot, and this is me personally, not everybody's like this, but I've learned a lot by doing it myself personally and trying different things and putting myself on different programs and being the guinea pig, and just because there's so much that you can't really explain with physiology, or I can at least. And you just kind of have to feel it, like doing the lactic repeats that we do at the camp and stuff. Like if you've never ever done that, like you can't prescribe that properly because you don't know what it feels like or how to explain it and do it. And thankfully, it doesn't mean we have to continually do it, but once we've done it, we know what it feels like and stuff. So
yeah, I think that was the best advice I was ever given when I first started coaching. Is it was like, go find someone you trust, ask them if you can coach them for free, and then just be like, will you literally try this stuff out for me? And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else.
Yeah.
Like, and we'll just continuously plug and play. And luckily I had a few people that were like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. And I had some great, and I've got one girl locally that she claims that she made me, which there's probably a little bit of truth to that, because she was a really good athlete. She's one of those that probably could have done really well on any program. But I had a few that, hired me and but they basically trusted me with whatever. And there were different times throughout the seasons, whether it was right after regionals or whatever, a different competition, that we were like, hey, we're going to try this thing and we're just going to see if it works. And if it does, it does. If it doesn't, we'll go back to the drawing board.
See my type A Enneagram 3, I immediately hired mentors, and I was like, I will not fail anyone from the outset. I will be perfect from the start. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, but
yeah,
I mean,
I'm an Enneagram 8. I just think I have it all figured out.
It's kind of like the interview question where they're like, what's your greatest weakness? And like, I'm too hard of a worker. Well, legit, one of my greatest weaknesses as a coach early on was that like I was afraid to fail. And so I hired mentors, which was great. Like, and I learned a ton, and I got where I am because of it. But I would see how easy it came to them. And then I would be like, I mean, it was just like they were spitting stuff off, and I'm like, I have to be that now. Like, and then I got into the weeds, and so I learned the why behind everything, and then my head was just spinning. Yeah. And then I would freeze, like when it came. It was like writing a paper, right? Like you're like, I would just freeze when it came to write the program, and I mean, if you asked me why I was writing what I was writing, I could give you like a freaking 3-page essay on one workout, right? Because I knew the reason. But I had to learn how to play more. So Mike, again, like Mike knows the why, but he, even in my own training, like if you remember at the time when I hired Mike, it was just because I was like, man, like
that's where it started.
Yeah. I've become so like, that's a whole other story with some of the autoimmune stuff, but like in a little bubble of mine, and I need to be free. Yeah. Mike kind of freed me up, and it's like, look, it doesn't hurt. Yeah. Like you can run and you can do all these things. So,
and that's a good example of like some of the mindset stuff with people, is just giving people an unbiased outside perspective of what's actually going on, and just whether that's asking questions and letting them like hear themselves or realize.
I remember
themselves.
You're like, have you gotten better? You're like, with all this time you've taken off and like, all this sheltering in your training, have you gotten better? And I'm like, no. He's like, so then why don't we just go have some fun? I was like, okay. I was like scared.
Like, what's the worst that can happen? You still you still feel like you feel?
Nothing happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Good segue.
That's good. Yeah. So take us into off-season training. Like when you're working with an athlete, they just finished quarterfinals. You make them rest a little bit, which is stuff we talked about last time, and just really like mindset that we were talking with Jake, and just what it looks like to approach an off-season mentally more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
What are some actual practical things programming-wise that people should be thinking about and things they should be looking for when searching for a coach or searching for a program to follow for the offseason when they want to address places where they are pretty disappointed quarterfinals-wise, or anything that they've tested open or any local comp? Like, where do you go with people and how do you set that up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first thing is figuring out what that thing is that they have to work on. And so if you pull that out and you realize we just go real broad, if it's gymnastics, strength, or capacity, none of those things are going to specifically get addressed in just a normal template program. And even beyond that, you can't go find a program for those specific things and just add it on top of your program. That doesn't work either, because you're still doing a bunch of volume on, chest to bars and upper body pulling stuff in your normal metcons in the program, but you're adding on this gymnastics thing. Well, then you're either adding on too much fatigue, either doing it under too much fatigue, or you're just putting too much on the structure, the shoulders, whatever, to potentially cause injury or breakdown. So figuring out what are the things how much, like I mentioned earlier, how much CrossFit are we going to keep in, and how much intensity are we going to pull back, and then how are we going to address the specific things that they need. So, like if it's gymnastic strength, is it actually the positioning and the technique, the movement, or is it actually strength that they need to get better at? They need to get stronger to do more muscle ups, or they need to actually have better, like the kip motion is in the snatch and the clean. Is it actually technique work, or do they just need to get stronger in the legs? Like really parsing out what is the thing that we really need to focus on, and trying to get that down to, one or two things that we're really going to hone in on in the off season, early off season. Because there's obviously periods of the off season where the farther out you are, the further your training can look from the sport. So if you're 8 months away from your main competition, then your training doesn't need to look exactly like the sport. And again, that's kind of what we talked about at the beginning, is that it's going to vary depending on the person. I think, and I wasn't training with Rich all those years, but his probably didn't vary that much, just maybe the intensity and the volume. But for a lot of people, it needs to pull back a lot. And maybe you're just going down to doing one CrossFit workout a week, and the rest of it is more specific training on those weaknesses. So figuring out those weaknesses and pulling those out and really hammering those is kind of where we start.
Do you initiate your off season with most of your athletes with like a testing phase, even if you've done like initial testing with them, or how do you like determine what limiters?
Yeah, typically it's like some of that depends on the level. Like if they just got through the open, then we may do some kind of a testing phase. But if they just got through quarterfinals and like just missed semifinals, then I don't put them through another testing. Like they just did a test weekend, or even more so if they just finished semifinals or whatever, then no. A lot of times at that point you've been working with them enough. I may test. I won't do like a test week for sure. But we may test a couple things. We may not, again, test a back squat 1 rep max or, something like that. But we'll probably test a couple things just to get a baseline. And it may be stuff that's outside of the spectrum of CrossFit. So it may be a 10K row. Like I gave somebody a 10K row recently, and they were like, "Really? We're doing a 10K row?" And yeah, it's not really the sport that you're training for necessarily at the level that that person is, but it's something that we're going to build off of in the off season. And so we're going to build capacity off that 10K test, which is then going to lead to the 5K, which is then going to lead to 2, 3K, which is more of the sport when we get to it, when it comes to quarterfinals. So that if I can test it and it doesn't directly conflict with what they just tested in quarterfinals or open or whatever their season was, then I'll probably test it. If I know that it's something that's pretty similar to that, then I won't test it.
How do you deal with the mindset? You said that's one of your strengths. I know it is as a coach. And you get somebody who, is an avid CrossFitter and they've only been doing classes most of the time or following a template like a Mayhem Compete or any other. And so they're used to a lot of variety. and then they come start working with you, and you're like, hey, we're going to pull back because you got to get stronger or whatever it might be. We're going to pull back to, like you mentioned, one CrossFit workout a week. A, what do you mean by one CrossFit workout a week? Like, what does the training setup actually look like for them? And then B, how do you deal with that pushback that you may get where people are like, I'm bored?
Yeah. So one
kind of already going into another. Those are two questions. So.
One CrossFit workout a week is just like one AMRAP or one for time piece. Not that doesn't necessarily mean like their intervals aren't going to be CrossFit style. It means like just one session where you're
one banger.
Yeah, kind of treating it like a open style workout. And then
the rest of the week might look like what then? If that's like that one, how are you incorporating CrossFit into the rest of their training?
Yeah, so the intervals, so that you asked about the mindset of somebody coming in, which is obviously super common. I call it exercise ADD, where like CrossFit has created this thing where they can't stay focused on any. Like if I have a triathlete, like I give them the same program for 6 weeks in a row, and they're like, "Yeah, that's great."
Everybody talks about that in marathon training.
But with CrossFitters, it's like if you do 2 weeks of the same thing, like, "Hey, are we changing this, or is that what are we doing here?" So yeah, I mean, it's at that point, it's a lot of it is just educating and explaining what we're actually working on and what we're focusing on and how you're getting better and why you hired me in the first place. Because obviously something was off before. Either you weren't progressing like you wanted to. I mean, that's probably the reason, right? You weren't progressing like you wanted to, so you're here for a reason. And I'm showing you that this is how we're going to progress this thing. And that doesn't mean, depending on their training age, their actual age, where they are in the sport, will also dictate how forceful I am on doing very monotonous stuff. So if they're, a semifinals games athlete and they're paid to do this, then it doesn't matter. Your feelings don't matter really at that point.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like you're
pretty biblical.
Yeah, you're hired for a job and like you do the job. It's just like any other job. So you don't have. I mean, you have feedback and you have a choice, but there's a lot more of like, hey, you got to put your head down and work for this time. If they're like not even a quarterfinals level athlete, then I'm going to work some more variety in there, and just there's always a balance, like you mentioned, I think before the podcast started. There's always a balance of entertainment and giving them exactly what they want. And as individual coaches, we're trying to give them as much of what they need while keeping them entertained and keeping them focused on what they're doing, and also pushing them, giving them enough stimulus that's just beyond their capacity. So we're not giving them a program that a games athlete's on and they have no chance of completing it. We're also not giving them stuff that's easy, but our job is to give them stuff that's just beyond their capacity that pushes them. And that goes in any realm of what we're working on, whether that's a skill, muscle ups, or it's rowing intervals or whatever it is. We're trying to just barely nudge them past their limitations.
I'd say that's probably, I've lost more clients than anything for any other reason, because of like boredom.
Yeah.
Right. And then potentially on me, like doing a poor job of explaining the benefits of embracing boredom and monotony, or just like you said, exercise ADD, where it's like we get a lot of young CrossFitters who they have no sports background, right? Like they've never done any linear progressions. They've never done Wendler 531 on their back squat, right? Or back squatted every Monday for weeks, or any endurance training. And yeah, like you said, like they think like if you do 2 or 3 weeks in a row of rear foot elevated split squat, like it's like torture.
Yeah.
Those are torture.
It took me
a bad example.
Yeah, that was a bad example. It is torture, but they work.
Yes.
And that was a long time for me to sympathize or empathize. I don't know what the right word is there, for a long time with that, because I was a golfer growing up. And then, so that's an individual sport, and you spend every day working on the exact same thing. And sometimes you get better, sometimes you get worse, because it's a complete skill sport. And then I started CrossFit before anybody else did in Mississippi. So I've taken like 10 classes in my entire life. Like I have never been on the group side of things. So I've always trained by myself, and it never really even occurred to me, especially when I was competing. Like I was just coming to do what I do. So it took me a long time to sympathize with that, but it's one of those things where, like we talked about at the beginning, of just going through it for the years, that I think we've done at least a decent job trying to navigate that a little bit more in Mayhem coaching, where we do incorporate that weekly, at least that weekly community workout where they're all doing the same thing. So at least you have that one little touch of a little bit of community, even if you're not in the gym with somebody. And if you're not in the gym with somebody, typically you're committed to making it your sport, and you know that it's going to be hard, and you've committed to it. I have several of those people that, like, it gets hard in the off season, and they know that, and they talk to me about it, but they also just recognize that that's part of it, and it's going to get hard. And if you're in a gym that has people that you can, even if you go to a Mayhem affiliate, like doing that compete workout that we do on Friday oftentimes lines up with the affiliate. So just jumping in on the class on that day and doing that one time. But again, at the same time, if you really want to get better, then it's kind of one of those things you just got to accept. And
that's something I did a little differently once I had like meetings with my athletes post quarterfinals, and a lot of them are go to Mayhem affiliates. But I just talked to them. I was like, hey, every Friday, like I'm gonna write your strength work and like all your priorities in your session 1, but your session 2, like go take class with your gym.
Yep.
I don't even care what it is.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't even care if it doesn't align with what we have. Just go do it. Like tell your friends you're coming to the 4 p.m. class and like go do that. But everything else like is mine.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was hard for me to
enjoy it,
wrap my head around, because for so long I didn't see the need for that. Because everything has a purpose in our training programs, and we put all this work into our programs. We're like, they go off and do something random, and you're like, that's not what we made sense for. But at the same time, back to your point, like that's CrossFit, and it gets back to it. And most of the time, the class workouts is not going to beat somebody up that bad most of the time. Every now and then there'll be one that was just like, well, that was too much. But most of the time, they're fine. And so it just allows them to get some good intensity and have some fun and last another week on their own.
It's a cool way to break up the monotony in the off season too. And especially like you're saying, like if we're testing someone coming off quarterfinals or like finishing up some testing based on what happened in quarterfinals, setting up a game plan, and someone, let's say, like has a major strength hole. And so we're like, I don't know, whether we're starting them with like a 4-week hypertrophy phase or 6-week hypertrophy phase. It's like, hey, you're going to be doing one session. You're basically really not going to be doing much conditioning at all. If you do, it's going to be like intervals on a machine or just zone 2 work on machines, like aerobic maintenance.
Yeah.
And then, okay, that's it. And everybody, they're like, wait, I just got off doing 2 sessions a day, smashing myself to get ready for quarterfinals. Like, I'm going to gain 10 pounds and I'm not going to look shredded.
I think that's a big part of it.
It's a huge one.
Yeah.
And I had a athlete the other day, and I was like, honestly, I don't really care what you look like as long as you make it to semifinals next year.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you? I was like, do you care if you look good, or do you care if you make it to semi? Like, which one is the goal?
Yeah.
It's a tough balance. I mean, it's a tough balance with the entertainment and making sure people have fun. But as soon as we start saying that we want to win in a sport, like my line was always, and maybe I'm just being a big jock, but it's like, since when is training supposed to be fun in sport? Like my whole life, training wasn't about being fun. Training was about preparing you to win. Winning is fun. Like that was the goal. Right now, I know I sound like such a jerk, and people are like, you're no fun, unempathetic or whatever it might be, but it's like,
but that
was my whole life. And then all of a sudden I get to CrossFit and everybody's like, but we're supposed to have fun. It's supposed to all be like cute and sexy and changing all the time. And I was just like, I mean, I get the sport is varied. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about like, when's it time to grind?
Yeah. But that's part of any sport. And
am I wrong, Mike?
Like you said, winning is sport. Winning is, winning is fun. Yeah. So like, to me, I think that's the people that excel the most in the sport love the grind. And that, it's not always, I mean, fun is like even a weird word. Like relative. It is fun. It's not easy and it's not always like enjoyable, but that grind of it is fun. Yeah. And that's just got to be, those are the ones that do the best in the sport at the end of the day.
I was actually explaining this to one of my other athletes the other day. And I was like, for some reason, when I was training, like, and I knew my Olympic lifting was good. I knew if a barbell cycling workout came up, it was good. But if like a high volume burpee box jump over workout came up, it was like any place I was in, it was over. And my coach would like
quarterfinals workout.
Yeah, that would have destroyed me back in the day. But then like literally my fitness started to flip because of one thing. I would go into training like progressively, and the coach, it was Matt at the time who was coaching me. I was like Torres's first athlete. And he was like, dude, we're going to drill this weakness and we're going to do these long aerobic workouts that you're going to do really slow. And I would like come in and my first session would literally be something like this at like 60% effort. It'd be like 3 sets of like 150 double unders, 70 cal row, 70 burpees over the rower for like 3 sets. And it would just be like flow. And for some reason though, like when I would see that, I would be like hyped. When I woke up in the morning, I'd be like, that's exactly what I need.
Yeah.
And it was miserable. I hated every second of it. I was like, I'd way rather max out my snatch right now.
Yeah.
But like not actually. And kind of how I knew I was done competing is when I stopped caring about that.
Yep.
And I was like, I just don't really care if I'm good at burpees over the rower anymore.
Yeah.
And that kind of helped me really figure out like, oh, I want to be more of a coach now than I do want to be an athlete, because that grind was no longer fun, but there was a good 5-year span in my life where I was like, I don't want to do anything else except burpees over something, because if I get good at burpees over something, I'm going to make regionals, was like what was ingrained in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, mine was similar. Mine was machines. Obviously I'm not the tallest athlete out there. So 5'6", and so like machines don't come easy, but most CrossFit movements do. But I knew mine was pretty simple, because back in the day when I was competing, basically all we had was a rower. So it was like, if I could get my 2K row down, then I'm good. Like I'm going to go, everything else is fine. And so it was enjoying those long, I mean, I would get up to doing, 20, 500 meter repeats, and it's enjoying those long grind of a sessions. And then got to the same point. I was like, you know what? I don't really care about rowing anymore. And I'm just going to stop rowing.
It was okay.
And it was fine.
Where else in life, in like serious things in life, do we put fun as like the ultimate virtue? Like where does that even work? Because it doesn't work when you're married, right? No. Like embracing monotony is part of being a good spouse. It doesn't
makes you a good disciple.
Great, right? Yeah. Exactly. Like since when is it like I'm going to keep doing devotions if they're fun, or I'm going to keep praying as long as it's fun for me, or I'm going to be a good father as long as it's fun, right? Like it. Yeah. Now people are like, but it's a hobby of mine. Well, that's different. But we're talking about performance right now, right? Yeah. So
over the verse in James, count it all joy.
Yeah. When you face trials of many kinds.
117.
Yeah. You would know the actual reference.
I think it's 117. Could be off.
Can I get the footnote on that page as well? What's the footnote say? Have you seen a shift in that over the last decade or more of coaching, where maybe in the early days when you first 2012, 2013, people were better at embracing the grind, and it's gotten worse, or is it about the same? Everybody suffered from exercise ADD from day one.
I think they have. I think the difference was we never, or it was less. Back then, it was just do more CrossFit, and so the grind was still just doing more fun, sexy CrossFit workouts. So it was a little bit different. So I think that's what contributed to the exercise ADD that we all developed, because we just did more volume on the hard stuff, the CrossFit stuff. And the problem with that is, which I don't even know if we've gotten to our topics on the podcast necessarily, but the problem with that,
scratching the surface.
Yeah, the problem with that is your body's going to break down, or you're just going to plateau. And so if you just keep doing more intensity on CrossFit workouts, you're never building the support system that can support a really high level of CrossFit. Yeah. And so the volume wasn't as high, like the volume of the sport wasn't as high back then. And so we didn't need to be able to do 40 or 50 muscle ups and then 150 chest to bars the next day and then 20 rope climbs the next day. Like we needed to do one of those things or half of those reps. And so the volume wasn't as high. And as the volume gets higher and higher, you have to pull back and build up your support system in your body to be able to handle those high volumes during the season. So we can't just do 150 GHDs and 150 toes to bar from the get-go every day like people think they could do at Mayhem. We have to build up the support to be able to do that. And the same thing with the shoulders and the hips and the knees and everything. Your body's got to take a time back to where we can kind of reset everything and build up the support system to get a higher peak. As the great Louis Simmons said, your top of your peak is only as high as your base.
Louis Simmons, they get you fired up.
Yeah, R.I.P.
Yeah.
So what would you, drawing us back into what we were talking about in the beginning, like what would you say are like some of the 3 biggest things that you see people do in the off season that just kind of sets them up to fail or just really kind of just repeat their performance from the year before?
Yeah, so like let's take this year's quarterfinals workout with the muscle ups in it, and people got there and were like doing singles or failing muscle ups, and they've never done that before. So now they're going back to the drawing board. And they're just going to do a bunch of workouts with a bunch of muscle ups in them. And that may not be the problem with why they're even there. It may have nothing to do with their muscle up. They may have a 2-minute 30 muscle up for time score, but maybe their toe to bar is terrible or their core hip flexion is terrible, and so they're not really addressing the actual issue. And so a lot of times, I feel like this is a little bit less common now, but maybe it's just who I'm surrounded by. But that was a big problem back in the earlier days, is when the open would dictate the next year's training, and even more so, the one workout that they did poorly on the open they would just hammer that thing,
and then everything changes.
Changes, and they wouldn't even address why they actually were terrible at that workout. Like, for example, I was not good at the power snatch double under workout. The 15 power snatches, 30 double unders. It's not a good workout. But if I just did snatches and double unders, that did not address the issue at all, because I'm great at double unders. My shoulders have terrible capacity in that external rotation position. So if I didn't address that, then I wasn't going to get anywhere. It wasn't that I was necessarily even that. Hinging isn't a great movement, but if I just did more hinging from the shoulders down, it wasn't really addressing the issue. It's all on the shoulders for me. And so like really they would do bad in an open workout and then like basically take that exact workout and just get better at that workout. Kind of like you talking about with burpee box jump overs. That's a better example, because if you do improve on burpee box jump overs, there's going to be a lot of carryover on a bunch of different movements. But a lot of times they would see a workout and not look at what the actual problem is. And you've talked about this, and we've talked about this in our coaching calls, but handstand push-ups. Are you bad at why are you bad at handstand push-ups? What's the actual limiter? Is it shoulders? Is it triceps? Is it something? Is it core stability? What's the actual thing that we need to pull back on and address?
Yeah. I think something Jake and I have been talking a lot about more recently, especially like even with semifinals training, like knowing the workouts, is like, how can we create energy system transfer for those workouts without doing the same workout 600 times in the next 4 weeks? Can you like kind of talk a little bit about what that would look like in an off season, and how like instead of just doing snatch and double unders, there's other things you can do that will transfer and long term get you way better at snatch and double unders than just doing a million snatches and double unders every day?
Yeah. So just an example that's in my head, and we talked about this on our recent call of grip strength, and just seeing how much of a factor I feel like grip strength plays in the sport overall. And just, I don't know, for some reason this year it's kind of stuck out to me a little bit more, but I think that really plays a big factor. And so,
my take on that though.
No, I don't.
Oh, really? We've talked about it. It's like, is it really? Oh, now we're going to digress.
Oh no,
we don't have to.
The grip strength rabbit hole.
Shut up. Yeah. Oh no, it's just like I've always said, is it really grip? A lot of the elite athletes are like, my grip blows up. I've heard every single time they say that that's the limiter, where it's like, yes, it is your grip blowing up, but it's like your capacity is so high on all the upper pulling movements that it's like the first thing to go is your extremity, your grip. It's not your lat. It's not your back, right? Like,
no, that's fine. That feeds into where I was going. So like, I think a lot of people complain about a lot of people that I'm thinking about may complain about their biceps blowing up or their lats blowing up or something else. And I'm going back to the drawing board and looking at grip and making sure grip is strong enough for it to be the limiter almost.
Touche, yeah.
And so figuring out ways, and it's a good one to think about, because there's 1,000 ways to train the grip. There's so many different grip strength qualities. And I was talking to somebody, actually Tyler, about this earlier this week, like with baseball players, when I did an internship with the baseball team at Mississippi State, and they trained grip so many different ways. Rice bucket, twisting, squeezing, explosive squeezing, endurance, pinch strength, finger strength. There's all kind of different grip factors. So if we can address that, does that then make it to where they're not having to squeeze so hard with everything else, their lats and their biceps, and those don't blow up because their grip is not, they're not having to worry about it. And something else we've talked about that has changed over the years, we never wore grips on anything. And now it's you learn to try to use the grips as like a hook and like not actually use your grip strength and get a stronger grip. And because we've been doing that, have we actually weakened our grip relative to everything else because we've been relying on this grip thing the whole time? And That was actually something that Tyler brought up. I was just talking about how grip was never, and all that stuff was never really an issue for me. And he was talking about Rich. The only reason he wore grips was just to protect his hands because of the volume, but we never used them.
We had the tape
for any reason. Yeah, I never even used that.
Remember that like whole, it was like a skill.
Yeah.
Just getting that tape on your hand.
The Coban tape.
Yeah.
But then he brought up the use of and trying to actually relax your grip on all these things, which is important during a workout.
Sure.
But training it, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and think about that a little bit differently. So I guess that's kind of an example.
That's actually really interesting. This is so random, but Emma Carey does like all of her strict gymnastic stuff with no grips always. Yeah. Always. And I think it helps her so much. And she'll only do like Metcons with her grips on.
Yeah. I've never worn them, but
that's really cool. So I think
random music playing in the back here.
Yeah. So I think with off-season specifically talking to, like, you're talking about identifying limiters, what's something that like athletes can do when they're doing training in the off-season and talking to a coach and working with a coach? Like, how do they communicate to you what they're feeling and what they need to like work on so that you can adjust programming accordingly? Yeah,
I think that's where going a back and forth dialogue is very important. I don't know what's going on right now, but
I don't know. It's like a video game or something.
It's like the Land Before Time.
Yeah.
But really hashing out what they're feeling during the workouts, what they're like. They'll initially say, "My total bar with the limiter in that workout." Okay, let's talk about that. Like, what do you feel like was your limiter? Was it your hip flexors, like actually getting your feet up? Was it your abs? Was it your grip? If it was your grip, is there shoulder limitations in that? Because if their shoulder's not sitting in a good position, their grip's going to be affected differently. So just talking through the athlete of really trying to figure out what they're feeling and what's going on, and then testing that theory in different ways. So if they say grip, then we say, all right, let's give you a big farmer's carry workout, and they say grip's not an issue in that. Okay. Is it grip from a hanging position, or is it really not grip? It's more shoulder. You're getting some blood flow cut off because you're limited in mobility, so you're not getting good blood flow to your grip. So that's why it's limiter overhead. Talking to them, figuring out what they're feeling, and then testing that theory or testing what they're feeling in a more specific way where you can kind of find the root cause.
That's good. Yeah, I feel like that's one of my favorite things about the programming side of coaching is like finding a million different ways to like address limiters, and then finding out ones that A, don't really address it, but then B, like they're like, whoa, that was it. Like something crazy happened today. And I'm like, oh, sick, we found it. Yeah. That's just like such a fun part of programming, and even working with an athlete like over the course of a season and helping them progress through stuff, and then potentially like making stuff harder throughout a periodization because they're actually getting better at it. Yeah. How often would you test an athlete out of like a cycle? Let's say you did like, you had a plan for like a 3-month off season. Would you test them out of a specific, like, I don't know, limiter focus 6 weeks in, 4 weeks in, athlete dependent?
Athlete dependent, but, well, I'd probably say more movement dependent or whatever the weakness is. So like if it's a machine limiter, we make and test them more frequently if they're mentally willing to go there on that. But if it's like a 1 rep max deadlift, then I'm probably not going to test that until the very end. If it's a gymnastics capacity thing, we'll probably test that more frequently. It kind of depends on the scenario and what they're going for. But for gymnastic stuff, and even with those, I try to get the test. I try to find more than one test that can give us feedback. Just again, and maybe this goes back to the softness of the athletes these days, but mentally, it can be taxing. Like I think that wall ball burpee box jump over is a great test, but it's going to be hard for them to redo it in a different scenario and get the same feedback on. So that's one of those where it's like it'd be a great test if you could set up everything the right way, but it's probably not going to be. You're probably going to need to find a different way to test and see if they got better at that. Yeah. Whereas 30 muscle ups for time, they can probably test that again. So
my coach was not kind to me. He would make me repeat that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 dumbbell snatch burpee box jump over. Yeah, I think I've done that workout about 7 times in my life.
Yeah,
to be honest.
See, we would break that down to a 10-minute AMRAP and try to get feedback based off that, so you don't have to go quite as deep.
For the people that will start working with you this off season, that are going to watch this podcast and be like, that's my guy. You know? But yeah, so what would you, if you had to speak to them, what should they expect from you? Let's say they've been following Mayhem Compete or any other template. What should they expect from you in the actual programming of what's going to be different or what's going to change from what they've been doing? How is your coaching going to look different in this off season than what it might look like on Mayhem Compete?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's going to be. I mean, this sounds obvious, but it's going to be more specific to what you actually need.
I think we should actually say real quick that, sorry to cut you off, that Mike programs the master's track.
Yeah, I do the master's track. Yeah. And so
what's going to, go ahead,
there's the master's track, and this goes for all of them really, is we're trying to hit everything. We're trying to be as broad as possible because we're writing it for a broad audience. And so, like, I was talking with an athlete this morning, and he was like, one of the things I had to learn when I signed up with you a year ago was that, like, we may not do certain movements for a month or two at a time, and having the confidence that the program is going somewhere and it's building towards that. And so I don't need to worry about that. Even if it's a strength, like this guy's a great squatter. And so we didn't squat a lot when he started. Whereas if you're on Mayhem Compete, you're going to squat the same as everybody else is going to squat. And if you're really good at certain movements, you may not touch those movements for a little while, and that's okay. You're probably either doing stuff that's still going to assist with those things, or you're going to be fine when you come back to those things, and it's not going to be an issue. So you're going to, not only is the training going to be a little bit more specific to working on and hammering your weaknesses, there's times where you're not going to be doing certain movements, and that can be okay. I would also say too, though, that, you know, so many people get caught up in hammering weaknesses and forgetting about their strengths. Yeah. And we've talked about this a lot of, like, you have to, if you have a really strong strength, like, we won't name names, but one of your girls, I know she had to, like, win the clean and jerk. Like, she's got to win that. Like, otherwise she knows that one of her workouts is going to be a, damage control.
Yep.
Yeah. And you're not ever going to win that workout.
Yeah.
That being said,
how do you
got to
balance
win
that
that.
then? So you get somebody in the off season who's like, oh man, let's just say they want to get better at local competitions and they can do 3 ring muscle ups, but they're an aerobic freak.
Yeah.
Right. They're, and their upper gymnastics are poor. They're just not strong enough. But man, they're gonna,
they get a run row workout.
Yeah. Females running like a,
so typically that's why, and that's where the CrossFit stuff gets pulled out of the program. Mm-hmm. So you get rid of some of the middle ground stuff that's not really working on anything specifically other than just CrossFit. Which, again, we talked about earlier, you still have to do that. You got to practice the sport, but that's where some of that gets pulled out. So you have big sessions that are focused on or limitation of upper body strength, pulling and pressing, and then you still keep some of those aerobic pieces in, and maybe those aren't as intense because it's enough to just keep her confident in that, keep her sharp in that, but it's not just hammering her. And it could be the same way if you flipped it around. Like, you still give touches on it and just make sure they're confident with that. Because a lot of times that's all it is for those people that are so good at certain things, is just keeping their confidence there that they can still do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest things Mike taught me early on too, like, was making sure people can hit home runs, like, when it's time to. Yeah. Because, again, we get so caught up in weakness-based training. Yeah. We just beat people's weaknesses to a pulp, which mindset too gets, talk about a grind.
Yeah.
And then in the early days, I was like, who cares? Suck it up.
And that can somewhat also be justified physiologically, that those, like, I'll use myself as example. Like I said, I'm a much better squatter than I am pulling off the floor. So not only do I not enjoy pulling off the floor as much, it's literally more taxing on my nervous system to do that. So if I'm doing deadlifts 3 days a week, probably everything is going to get worse, including my deadlift, because I'm not recovering from it. And so it's a balance of that. And that's not as much for, like, the conditioning side of things, but from a strength side of things, you can definitely hammer weaknesses too much and make everything worse, including that thing you're trying to get better.
So the squat every day, like, small off program.
Yeah. Probably not the best idea.
Depending who you are.
Yeah.
If you're a Russian on.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you have assistance, and you maybe can do that.
Yeah. I think just kind of as we wrap it up, could you kind of just walk us through, like, how you would lay out, like, a season structure for someone who wants to peak for quarterfinals? Like, what does that look like? How long is the off season? When's preseason? When's, like, in season start for you? Just, like, in general.
Yeah.
And like everything that we talked about today would be what we would be focusing on that off-season portion?
That's an easy question to answer.
Nice swag.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I thought you were serious.
No, I was not
I was
serious.
like, wow, dude, this is awesome.
No, I was not
Let's
serious.
go,
I need a
Mike.
whiteboard and that was not serious.
Give 30 seconds.
Yeah. So basically, I try to get a competition in the middle.
Sure.
So I try to get one practice competition so we can practice peaking and tapering into a competition once outside of just that quarterfinals, like one serious competition, maybe some other ones mixed in. But so kind of have 2 different seasons in that bigger season. So I have an off season for 6 to 8 weeks, and then I start building into doing more and more, and then you have 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 weeks of preseason leading into the competition, and then you start that all over again, and then you have another season like that, if that makes sense.
For the quarterfinals.
For the quarterfinals.
Yeah, that's cool.
Was that general or
Oh yeah, no, that's
specific
perfect.
enough?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking how I run it in my head is like usually after quarterfinals there's like a small completely off portion, and then like depending on the athlete and what competition they want to do and what that looks like, I do a similar thing. Is like, okay, I'm like, this is my off season. Like I just think about it like I place that competition in the middle, ish, somewhere in there usually. So it's like 2-month-ish off season, little comp prep, do the comp, then like a little more off season, and then like a small preseason. Usually I bias myself, like December-ish is when I start thinking of that, where like maybe I start shifting depending on the athlete, like a little more strength maintenance-ish and a little more conditioning coming in. And then by the time like January swings around, it's becoming even a little more conditioning. And then open swings in, we kind of hit the open, use that as, well, if that starts to matter a little bit more next season, then we want to be a little fitter leading into the open. And that like open is like the beginning of in season in my head. And that's always really helped me just like lay out structure. It just in general, like once I sit down and identify limiters like you're talking about with athletes and lay out a full off season, it's like, okay, these are the time frames I have. I can do a 6-week cycle of hypertrophy. I can do a 8-week cycle of basic strength. And
most are similar. The only thing I would say is if they are one of those like specialist type people, that middle off season competition, we may play with something kind of off the cuff there. It looks a little bit different and say, let's see how you feel going into this competition if we don't do anything of your strength, or if we do more of this or that.
I'd say too, like the off season, it kind of the more advanced you get, the shorter your window is, right? So it's like you don't have, your everything. The higher your training age is, the more you've been at this, like the more you got to get to it right away. Not waste time, and maybe even lengthen your off seasons as well, right? Like, you know, the newbie can compete more often, right? The advanced athlete, if you want to put 10 pounds or you need to put 10 pounds on your squat, you're like a little 6-8 week plan, ain't gonna cut it probably.
A very scary thing could be Paige with a 6-month off season.
Dangerous.
Then coming off the games, having to take a month off, potentially doing rogue, and really only having an off season from October to December. That's a 5-week off season, 6-week off season. Our sport changes.
It's almost like if you're not strong enough already, like, and you're at that, like, you're just kind of, if you're at the elite level, but you're one of the weaker people at the elite level, you're kind of in trouble nowadays, right? With the frequency of competition, off-season comp, Wadapalooza, rogue, sponsorships, the business side of it all. There's almost no time to actually develop strength. So
I think that's a cool way to actually wrap us up, is like if we look at our off season and you really want to bridge a gap, this could be the most important portion of your season right now.
For sure.
It's like if you do the right thing while other people are training for semifinals, other people are training for competitions, or other people just jump right back into murdering themselves with CrossFit workouts, if you start doing the things you need to do right now, you are going to be a month or 2 months advantage on the people who still have to take a break after their main competition of the year.
And if you want to do it the right way with a guy who's been doing it since 2005, look no further
than the Michael McElroy.
Dude, that's it.
Full name.
That's how we cap it right there. Mike, thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Hanging out with us.
Enjoyed it.